Have you ever watched someone across the room and just known they were uncomfortable, despite their smile and cheerful words? Or sensed that a person was attracted to you before they said a single word? That's your brain unconsciously reading body language. Humanity's oldest form of communication that existed long before we developed speech. What if I told you that you could dramatically improve this natural ability? Learning to decode the silent signals that reveal what people are really thinking and feeling. The truth is, while most of us catch obvious cues, we miss up to 80% of the nonverbal information being broadcast right in front of us. Every day, in every interaction, people are telling you things they'd never say out loud. If only you knew how to see the signals. The human body constantly leaks information through unconscious movements, postures, and expressions that reveal our true thoughts and feelings, often contradicting our words. Think about what this means. In negotiations, you could spot when someone's actually eager, despite claiming indifference. In relationships, you could recognize genuine interest versus polite attention. In business, you could tell when a potential client is unsatisfied but too polite to say so. But here's the thing. Reading body language isn't about learning a list of isolated gestures. It's not as simple as crossed arms mean defensiveness or touching the nose means lying. The human body is far more complex, and interpreting nonverbal communication requires understanding entire patterns of behavior. The real secret to reading body language accurately lies in something experts call clustering. Looking for groups of consistent signals rather than single actions. One gesture might mean nothing, but when you see 3 or 4 behaviors that all suggest the same emotional state, now you're onto something significant. Let me show you how this works. Imagine you're talking to someone who says they're interested in your proposal. If they're genuinely engaged, you'll likely see a cluster of signals. Their body oriented toward you, occasional nodding, consistent eye contact, and an open posture. But if you notice their feet pointed toward the exit, minimal eye contact, compressed lips, and frequent glances at their phone, despite their agreeable words, you're witnessing a cluster that reveals their true desire to escape the conversation. This is why isolated signals can be so misleading. A person might cross their arms simply because they're cold, not because they're defensive. They might touch their face because of an itch, not deception. But when multiple signals align to tell the same story, you're witnessing the truth that goes beyond words. The first principle of effective body language reading is establishing a baseline. Everyone has unique mannerisms and default expressions. What looks like nervousness in one person might be their normal behavior. Before drawing conclusions, observe how someone acts in a relaxed state. This gives you a reference point for noticing meaningful deviations. I remember once conducting a job interview with a candidate who blinked rapidly throughout our entire conversation. Initially, I wondered if this indicated anxiety or even deception. But as the interview progressed, I realized this was simply his baseline behavior. He maintained the same blinking pattern whether discussing his qualifications or sharing casual anecdotes about his previous workplace. Had I jumped to conclusions based on this single behavior, I might have misjudged a qualified candidate. Once you understand someone's baseline, you can start looking for clusters of signals related to specific emotional states. Let's explore some of the most revealing clusters that can help you read anyone like an open book. When someone is genuinely comfortable and open to your ideas, you'll notice multiple signals working together. Their body will likely be squarely facing you. Palms may be visible, their posture relaxed but attentive, and their facial expressions animated. Their gestures will seem fluid rather than stiff, and you might observe occasional head tilts, which indicate active listening and processing. In contrast, discomfort and defensiveness create a very different cluster. Look for the body turning away slightly, hands hidden or formed into fists, shoulders raised toward the ears, minimal facial movement, and significantly reduced eye contact. You might also notice self-soothing behaviors like rubbing the neck or arms, unconscious attempts to comfort oneself during stress. Deception is particularly interesting because it creates one of the most distinctive clusters in body language. When people lie, they experience cognitive load, the mental effort of constructing and maintaining the lie. Emotional reactions like guilt or fear of being caught, and attempts to suppress these reactions, all simultaneously. This internal conflict often produces a cluster of behaviors: decreased overall body movement as the brain focuses on the lie, increased touching of the face, incongruent expressions like a smile that doesn't reach the eyes, slight delays in responses, and micro-expressions, flashes of true emotion that leak through their facade for a fraction of a second. I once observed this cluster during a business meeting where a team member claimed to have completed an important task. While confidently stating his progress, he simultaneously displayed reduced gesturing, touched his ear multiple times, maintained an unusually fixed smile, and briefly displayed a flash of fear when specific questions arose. These behaviors contradicted his verbal assurances, and indeed, we later discovered the task was significantly behind schedule. But here's where body language reading becomes more nuanced. These signals don't necessarily mean someone is lying about everything. They might be embellishing certain details, omitting information, or experiencing discomfort for reasons unrelated to deception. This is why context matters enormously when interpreting nonverbal cues. Interest and attraction create particularly noticeable clusters, as evolution has shaped these signals to be both subtle and effective. When someone finds you intellectually or romantically interesting, watch for increased eye contact followed by a quick glance away. Especially in romantic contexts, subconscious mirroring of your postures and movements, leaning forward, finding reasons for physical proximity or light touch, and preening behaviors, adjusting clothing, fixing hair, or other self-improvement gestures. These attraction signals are remarkably consistent across cultures, suggesting their evolutionary origins. However, their intensity and specific expressions may vary based on cultural norms. In some societies, these signals might be deliberately subtle, while in others, they may be more overt. This brings us to an essential point about body language. While certain core expressions and postures appear universal, cultural differences significantly impact both how body language is expressed and how it should be interpreted. In American and many Western cultures, direct eye contact is associated with confidence and honesty. However, in many East Asian, Middle Eastern, and indigenous cultures, prolonged eye contact with authority figures can be seen as disrespectful or challenging. A Japanese person lowering their eyes while speaking to you isn't showing dishonesty or lack of confidence. They're displaying cultural respect. Similarly, personal space varies dramatically across cultures. North Americans typically maintain about 18-20 inches of personal space in conversation, considering closer proximity invasive unless there's intimacy. But in many Middle Eastern and Latin American cultures, conversational distance is much closer. A Brazilian standing too close by American standards isn't being aggressive. They're engaging in their cultural norm of connection. Gestures perhaps show the most striking cultural variations. The familiar thumbs up, considered positive in Western contexts, is highly offensive in parts of the Middle East and West Africa. The American OK circle gesture is insulting in Brazil and Turkey. Even nodding doesn't universally mean yes. In Bulgaria and parts of Greece, it traditionally indicates no. I learned this cultural difference firsthand during international business meetings. When presenting to a mixed cultural audience, I noticed my Japanese colleagues nodding continuously during my presentation. I initially interpreted this as strong agreement with my points, but later discovered that in Japanese communication, nodding often simply acknowledges that they're listening, not necessarily agreeing. This misinterpretation could have led to significant misunderstandings had I not received this cultural context. These cultural differences don't mean body language reading is impossible across cultures. Rather, they highlight the importance of cultural context when interpreting nonverbal signals. The core emotions, happiness, sadness, anger, surprise, fear, disgust, still produce recognizable expressions across cultures, but their appropriate display follows cultural rules. Now that we understand clustering and cultural considerations, let's explore some practical scenarios where body language reading can provide remarkable insights. In negotiation contexts, body language often reveals information people are trying to conceal. When someone claims your offer doesn't interest them, but you notice their pupils dilate, they lean forward slightly, and their breathing quickens, their body is telling you they're actually quite engaged despite their poker face. Similarly, when someone says, "That's my final offer," while simultaneously displaying open palms, relaxed shoulders, and comfortable posture, they're likely still flexible on terms. During a recent salary negotiation, I noticed my potential employer displaying a fascinating cluster when presenting their final offer. While verbally emphasizing they couldn't go higher, they simultaneously exhibited several signals suggesting flexibility. They maintained an open posture. Their tone remained conversational rather than firm. And most tellingly, they continued active engagement rather than using closed body language to signal conclusion. Recognizing this incongruence, I politely persisted, and they indeed found room to improve their offer. In job interviews, candidates often say all the right things while their body tells a different story. A person claiming to thrive under pressure might display stress signals when discussing tight deadlines, shallow breathing, a slightly higher vocal pitch, and rigid posture. Meanwhile, someone who truly handles stress well might show consistent breathing, relaxed shoulders, and fluid hand gestures when discussing the same topic. Romantic contexts showcase some of the most fascinating body language patterns. Moving beyond obvious signals of attraction, subtle cues often reveal relationship dynamics. For instance, when introduced to a couple, observe their physical synchronization. Couples in tune with each other often unconsciously mirror postures and movements, creating a nonverbal dance that reflects their emotional connection. When one partner shifts position, the other often adjusts in response, maintaining their nonverbal harmony. In group dynamics, body language reveals the real power structures regardless of titles. The true leader in a room might not be the person with the highest position, but the one whose movements cause others to adjust. When they shift, others orient toward them. When they speak, others display more focused attention compared to other speakers. Their gestures tend to be more expansive and commanding of space, while others make themselves smaller in response. Let's talk about detecting deception through body language, one of the most requested but misunderstood applications of nonverbal reading. First, we need to dispel some myths. Despite popular belief, specific actions like touching the nose, looking left, or covering the mouth are not reliable deception indicators by themselves. Instead, look for clusters of behaviors that suggest cognitive load, emotional leakage, and attempts at behavioral control. When someone is fabricating information, they are performing multiple mental tasks simultaneously. Creating the lie, remembering the truth, monitoring your reaction, and controlling their own behavior. This cognitive load creates noticeable changes in their typical behavior. During deception, you might notice a decrease in illustrative gestures, the natural hand movements that accompany honest speech, an increase in speech errors or unusual pausing, asymmetrical facial expressions, particularly smiles that don't engage the eyes, and a noticeable difference between their behavior when discussing neutral topics versus sensitive subjects. I witnessed this pattern when consulting for a company investigating internal theft. During interviews, one employee showed consistent baseline behavior when discussing general workplace topics. However, when the conversation shifted to the missing inventory, his behavior changed markedly. His previously animated gesturing nearly stopped. His speech became more measured with unusual pauses, and most tellingly, he displayed a significant asymmetry between his verbal certainty, "I have no idea what happened," and his nonverbal behavior, which exhibited multiple stress signals. This behavioral cluster, while not proof of guilt, provided valuable direction for the investigation. Remember that deception detection is never about single tells. It's about noticing significant deviations from baseline behavior that cluster together in ways consistent with the psychological states associated with lying. Even then, these signals indicate areas for further investigation, not definitive proof. A key principle in advanced body language reading is congruence, the alignment between different communication channels. When someone's words, tone of voice, facial expressions, and body posture all tell the same story, you're likely seeing authentic communication. But when these channels contradict each other, for instance, confident words delivered with a shaky voice and defensive posture, the nonverbal usually reveals the truth. This incongruence explains why you might have uncomfortable feelings about someone despite their pleasant words. Your unconscious mind notices these contradictions even when you can't articulate them. Learning to consciously recognize these patterns gives you access to information you were already sensing unconsciously. To develop your body language reading skills, start by practicing in low-stakes environments. Watch people in public spaces, like cafes or airports, focusing first on obvious emotional states. Can you identify who's stressed, relaxed, impatient, or excited just from their nonverbal signals? As your observation skills improve, progress to more subtle states. Television interviews provide excellent practice material, especially when muted. Watch with the sound off and try to determine the relationship between speakers, their emotional states, and who holds the power in the conversation. Then replay with sound to check your accuracy. Political debates are particularly rich with nonverbal information. Notice how candidates behave when speaking versus listening, how they respond nonverbally to challenges, and which topics trigger changes in their baseline behavior. Even subtle shifts can reveal what issues make them uncomfortable. As you practice, remember that reading body language is a probabilistic skill, not a mind-reading superpower. You're identifying likely emotional states and intentions, not absolute truths. The goal is improved understanding, not perfect prediction. Also, recognize that body language observation creates an ethical responsibility. This knowledge gives you insight into people's unspoken feelings, which demands respect. Using these skills to manipulate or embarrass others violates the trust inherent in human communication. Instead, use your observations to increase empathy, improve understanding, and strengthen connections. The most valuable application of body language reading isn't catching people in lies. It's recognizing unspoken needs and emotions that might otherwise go unaddressed. Noticing when a friend shows signs of distress, despite claiming to be fine. Recognizing when a child is anxious but doesn't have words to express it. Identifying when a colleague feels unheard in a meeting despite not speaking up. By developing your ability to read these silent signals, you gain a deeper understanding of the people around you. You notice their discomfort before it becomes distress. You recognize their interest before they express it. You perceive their boundaries before they are violated. This awareness transforms how you move through the world. Conversations become richer because you're responding not just to words, but to the full spectrum of human expression. Relationships deepen because people feel truly seen and understood, often in ways they can't articulate themselves. The human body speaks continuously through a language older than words. It reveals our fears, desires, discomforts, and joys in every gesture, posture, and expression. By learning to read this ancient language fluently, you gain insight into the most complex and fascinating subject of all, human behavior. So the next time you're in conversation, remember that words are only a fraction of what's being communicated. The real story is written in the subtle shifts of posture, the quality of a smile, the timing of a gesture. These silent signals speak volumes to those who know how to listen with their eyes. Start paying attention today, and you'll be amazed at what has been invisible to you all along. The world is full of open books, just waiting to be read.